Okay, today you're going to learn how to get a Linux job by acing the interview. I'm going to tell you the top 18, yes, that's how many I've chosen, questions. These questions are going to be mainly up to interpretation as they should be. When I'm interviewing for a Linux candidate for a job, I look mainly for attitude and how they explain things. So we're going to be asking some questions like that, but we're also going to be asking technical questions because you actually want someone who knows their stuff. You don't want to train someone from the ground up. So there will be a mixture of technical questions and sort of open-ended questions. Even the technical questions to an extent are open-ended. There's no real correct answer because on Linux there's normally multiple ways to do things, right? Let's just jump right into it, shall we? So the first question is, how do I see my default routes in Linux? The answer that I'm looking for is IP root, like this. You just type IP root or IPR in and it will show you your default route there. That's all I'm looking for, okay? Establishing a base level knowledge of network connections. And so right there, that is an example of a very simple question. I'm not looking for anything too complicated. The next question is, how do I bring up or down an interface? And I'm looking for the IP link command here, IP link. So IPL or IP link shows you your interfaces. So if I want to set down my Wi-Fi, which is currently up, as we can see here, state up, I type IPL or IP link, they're both the same, they're aliases. So IPL set down, we're setting it to down, dev for device, and then the interface name, which was WLP3S0, I believe. Nope, what was it? WLP8S0, okay. 8S0. I run that, I have to be root for that. There we go. Now if we check, my Wi-Fi is now in state down, and you can even see in the bottom corner there, state down. And I bring it up in much the same way. So instead of set down, set up. And then you will see in the bottom, it is now up, and I am now connected back to my Wi-Fi. The next question is, what is the file etc fstab? The answers I'm looking for here is mainly, it's where you describe how your disks are mounted by default when your system boots. But I will show you the etc fstab file if you've not seen it before. If we look at etc fstab here, these are my disks by their UUID. This could be their actual disk name as well, like dev, ls, blk, or what have you. This is where you mount them. So this one mounts at slash, this one mounts at slash home, and this is the file system. These are extra options, but you don't really need to know too much about them. So for example here, that's saying this partition mounts, this disk, mounts at home. Now you can find those UUIDs by using the block ID command. So you have to run it as root, blk ID like this. So you see this disk here, is its UUID is that. So normally you put the UUID in etc fstab and not the actual disk name because this can change, but this will never change, okay? But notice these aren't in my fstab because these disks here are just basically a USB drive plugged in. So I won't put them in fstab because it won't always be there. Next question, sticking with the disks theme, is how do I check for free disk space? And that command is df. It's what I'm looking for. df, disk free. That's how I remember it. You can just put that in like that, but for extra credit, you can put df-h in there. Make it human readable, look. So that changes the available to an actual readable format. So that gives you the available space. But I would also accept and be impressed if they mentioned the command lsblock to list block devices. To list the block devices, this just lists the disks. It does also list their partitions and their mount points, but it shows slightly different information. So for example, the full size of that disk there, which df does not show. Next, I'll ask, how do I check for open ports on my Linux server? Now, this question is very open-ended as there are multiple ways to do this. I'll just tell you a few. So, what most older sysadmins will default to is netstat. There we go. And then give you some arguments for it. Netstat-natp is a common one used. And that shows you some ports here. So it shows that I've got web browsers open, OBS is open, and what port they're listening on, and what interface they're connected to, okay? So just nat for netstat, this means sort of numerical ID, so it won't try and look up the DNS names. All, so it shows all connections, including like local sockets. T, I believe that's TCP. P shows you the process ID of the associated dubri-what's-it. So for example here, PID program name, SSH. So that answer, the netstat is technically a decrepit program. Decrepit? Deprecated.
Depreciated.
So I'll also use the SS program, which is the better way to do it. SS-TULPN, I learnt And this is what I always use. So TCP, UDP, listening, port numbers, and no lookup, I believe. Yeah, no lookup. So with these commands, generally everyone has their own favorite flags they use. This is what I'll use. NatPer also works on this one. NatPer, and gives you basically the same output. So use whatever you like, but I'll accept any of these answers. So I'll also accept LSOF, which will show port numbers as well if you give it flags like this. As you can see there, it has some port numbers up. I'm blurring that output because it's showing some confidential info. But oh well. How do I find out what processes are consuming the most of my CPU? Okay. Now again, there's a couple of ways to do this. So the first way is using PS. Or, specifically, whichever flags you like for PS. So I like AUX, and that lists your processes. And that also, if we look at PS head, that also shows what percentage of CPU they're using. And if you want to find the top one, the way to make it nicer is to sort it, --short, and then you do -P CPU. For that now sorts by percentage of CPU usage. And then if I want to view that, I can pipe it into something like less. Bonus points. So the most used process is OBS for recording this video, which makes a lot of sense, all right? Other ways that you can do this, you can use the top command. And if you know how to sort top, you're better than me. I don't actually know how to sort using top because I use this other command that will basically everyone will know about called htop. And to sort on htop, which is like better top, you just press F6 at the bottom there, sort by, and then %CPU. And there we go, OBS again. That is a couple of ways on how you can sort by whatever is consuming the most processes. Next on the agenda, I'm going to ask just some general open source questions. Name 2 popular open source web servers, okay? This could be anything, but the answers that most people will give are Nginx and Apache, or Apache HTTPD, which would be acceptable answers, but honestly, any open source web server I would be happy with. That is a fine question because it just sort of tells you that they actually know about web servers, and anyone who's done anything on a server has installed a web server and probably knows about others. And simple and easy, nice breather. How do I check how many packages I've got installed on my system? Now, this one is an open-ended question, so there's a number of ways to do this, but I want the user to basically tell me a command to get a list of packages, and then also tell me a command to count the packages and how I will combine them into a one-liner. So for example, on Fedora you would use rpm-qa to query all your packages. On Ubuntu I would use apt-list installed, something like that. And then I'd expect them to pipe it into word count, okay? So I'll give you an example of me doing that. So I'll run the rpm-qa command, which will spit out all my packages, and then I'll pipe that into word count-l, which will tell me how many I've got. I have a lot of packages, okay? That is cringe. Most of you will probably have way under 1,000. I have no excuse for having that many packages installed. That's not what this video is about, okay? So that shows that knowledge of pipelines and package management, which is very important. Next, I'm just going to ask, if it's a written test, I'll put some questions like this down. So some port number questions. So a port number is what sort of port on the internet something is listening to. And I'll ask for things like SSH. SSH listens on port 22. And I'll only ask for common ports. I won't ask for anything esoteric because that's sort of cheating. I'll ask things you should know if you've used a computer if you've used and managed servers, you'll know these, okay? SSH, to remote into servers, that is port 22. DNS, how you look up IP addresses to URIs, that's port 53. HTTPS, secure web 443. And SMTP, which is mail, which if you're a server administrator, you configure a lot of, or you have done, and that's port 25 or 587 for relays and secure relays. By the way, pro tip, if you want to look up what ports things are using, there is a great file that exists on Linux called etc services. So if you didn't know, let me look at that for you. So if you didn't know a port, I would really accept an answer. In fact, I'd be more impressed if you didn't know the port, unless it was something obvious. Like, let's say you didn't know HTTPS, that's kind of cringe. But like, if you didn't know SMTP because you're a hobbyist and you've never configured email, which is fine, but you said, I'd look it up in etc services, I'd be extremely happy. I'll probably hire you on the spot, right? Because not many people know about this file. But let's say I look up SMTP, 25, there. Both TCP and UDP, and then you can like look for anything in here, like Doom. Yeah, Doom runs on port 666. That's pretty cool, eh? So there's lots of things on here. In here, you could just read through this file or tell me you know about it. Next question is, how do I keep a user account on the server but not allow them to log in? So here I'm looking for commands like usermod and setting their login shell. Okay, Let me show you. So you can go user mod -s to set login shell, okay? So if I man user mod and show you, options login. So user mod -s to set their shell. By default, that is probably something like bash. By I'm going to set it to user sbin no login. Then you put their username there, right? And then what happens? So whenever I log into a server, my shell is bash. So this happens. I just load up a bash session, okay? But if I set it to no login, user sbin no login, look what would happen. That would happen, okay? It would say this account is currently available to that user. That's all that program does, okay? But that's what I'm looking for. Next, just some quick, snappy questions. What hypervisor is built as a module into the Linux kernel? I'm looking for KVM there, but I'd accept something like QEMU or VRSH, which are commands to access it. But KVM mainly, the kernel virtual machine, very easy to remember. And name some popular open source configuration management utilities. So I'm looking for here things like Ansible, SaltStack, Puppet, what have you. Just name some of them. Basically to show that you're familiar with them. I don't need you to have used them, but I need you to know what they are. I'd even accept things like Terraform, like infrastructure as code there, and stuff like that, you know? Basic open-ended questions, okay? And the last sort of command where I wanted a specific answer is, using systemd, how do I tell a service to start on boot? What I'm looking for here is enable. Systemctl enable service, so HTTPD, like that, as root. Like this. So that starts a service on boot, okay? That doesn't start the service, that starts it on boot. So if I check the status of HTTPD, we can see it's disabled at the moment, but it is enabled. Whereas if I start it, it is now active running here. Inactive dead, sorry, I clicked the wrong thing. Inactive dead. You can also, some pro tips here, you can go is -enabled HTTPD, and it will tell you if it's enabled, which is useful for monitoring. And then you can also do, let me stop it. And to unenable something, you disable it. And then we check the status again. You see it's not running, and it is disabled. But if you run the command, enable --now HTTPD, this will enable and start it at the same time. Very, very cool. You see it's enabled and running. Wow. Now we move on to more open-ended questions. I know everything was kind of open-ended, but I wanted the command. Now, these are any command or anything, right? Like quizzing you, your brain, seeing what your attitude is like. So I'll ask, what is your favorite piece of open source software? Now here, I'm looking for anything, right? But I'm looking for familiarity with the open source world, which is very important for Linux and being a sysadmin, because you use a lot of it. So things here, I'd accept basically any command that you run. You could even say the Linux kernel, an application like a file manager or a terminal that you really like. My favorite piece of open source software is SSH, just because of how much you can do with it and what is built with it. I really like SSH, but also things like OBS. I'm recording this with OBS. That's open source software. It's brilliant. Something like, Zabbix monitoring service. That's good open source software. GIMP, I don't like it, but it's open source software, so you could say something like that. Here, I'm just looking for a answer. Next, I'd ask, what Linux distro do you run at home and why? If you are not running Linux at home in some way, that's where you have a home lab, a server that you maybe host things on, or a desktop or a laptop preferably, you probably don't have the right attitude, right? To be a Linux sysadmin, you need to be quite involved in the Linux ecosystem. I find that Linux sysadmins that aren't worse because they use it less, right? That's just common sense, okay? Again, I accept any answer here, but it's a question I will ask to gauge the user's attitude. Next, you log into a server. What is the first command you run? Now, for me, this is the W command. W. This shows you who is logged in, the uptime of the server, and the load average of the server. It's like a combination of who and uptime. It's great, okay? I really like it. I just have to run it when I log in. Now, I'd accept any command here. I'd accept I run ls or pwd to check which directory I'm in. I run iptables to check the firewall status. I run cat etc release to see what distribution I'm using. Which is quite a common one if you're working in different environments. Go cat etc release like this to cat all your release files together. You can see I'm on Fedora Linux, yada yada. So a lot of people I know do that. I don't know, you can run anything. Again, open-ended question, just to make sure you've done this before. Because you can know all the theory, But this is a personal question that that bookworms don't know. Right? If all you've done is read stuff, I don't care about you. I want you to have practical experience. That's all I care about. Don't care about certifications, because if you've only got certifications, you wouldn't have an answer to this question, right? Maybe you don't have an answer to this question. That's fine. But most people will have that one command that they run whenever they log into a server. If you don't, that's fine. But that is where the back and forth happens, so it's hard to get across in a video. And the last question is, what software do you just have to install on a server? So for me, this is Screen, GNU Screen. You might use tmux, and that allows you to multiplex the session, which basically means make one terminal many. It's very useful, especially on servers when you don't want to have to open a new SSH session, when you just want a new command line session. But again, this shows the user's done stuff before, because generally the default installs of servers are missing a few tools that you need. Like, I know CentOS doesn't have the full Vim experience, or so I'd install that as well. I'd also install HTOP everywhere to get better usage, like I showed earlier. Many answers here, and this is quite a fun back and forth conversation you can normally have with a candidate. And throughout these questions, you get a good idea of their attitude and their practical experience. And that's, at the end of the day, what an interview is for. I hope you learned something. Good luck in your interviewing and future endeavors. Subscribe or you'll become a Windows system admin.